Hello and welcome to ESG Talk. We're so glad that you tuned in to this episode of the chat. We are delighted to bring to you our first author interview. The reason for this is these are authors that I or some of my friends and colleagues have read over time that have really influenced our work in environment, social, and governance. Hey, this show is about you. You are a co-producer with us. So if you have author recommendations, please feel free to tell us, and we would love to include them in the show whenever possible in these short episodes of the chat. We have 4 quick questions that we'll ask our author so that you can get a sense for their work and their flavor, kind of the cliff notes, and then if you want to dive a little bit deeper. Now, Andrea is with us, and I've had the privilege to be a co-presenter with her with a closed-door meeting with our customers. I can tell you this. She has 30 years or more, 3 decades of experience that she can bring to the table as an author and as an expert in the field. Here's 2 quick facts about her. She was born and raised in Germany and Spain, is multilingual, and she does believe and opens up in her book about how this has influenced her work, both now and as she looks back over the years. The other piece that I enjoy about her work is that she explores how environment, social, and governance, ES&G, should be combined with the T, which includes technology, and how everyone needs to work together to think about the technology influences that will approach us as we think about the compliance, the risk, and the board level engagement in these key topics. So Andrea, I wonder for you, can you show us a copy of your book so that those who are watching on YouTube can see it when they offer to buy it? Wonderful. Look at that.
It's a real book. It's got pages.
It's got pages. That's right. In the Gloom to Bloom, how leaders transform risk and resilience to show value. She helps practitioners of all levels. One of my favorite pages in the book was page 326. And Andrea really gets into this idea of the interconnection of all the environment, social topics that create risk. Andrea, tell us a little bit about that component, because what you did, you wrote the book in 2019, and you really teed up the next 2 years that we all have experienced. So you're a little bit of a fortune teller.
Sadly, I guess I had my finger on the pulse of what was going on. The book was actually released a month before the pandemic hit all of us, unfortunately. But you could see a lot of this stuff going on already. And so I've always been very tuned into trends, to historical streams that interconnect with each other. And we had seen already a deterioration of geopolitics, the rise of disruptive technology, all of these major trends, and sort of trouble along the way and trouble in the horizon. So for me, the environmental, social, governance, and technology risks and opportunities, because I like to talk about it that way as well, are really interconnected. And it's really up to us as human beings to decide, are we going to try to do good with these things, or are we going to manipulate, misuse, and abuse these developments?
I think that's critical, because a previous chat from last week, we talked about how do practitioners handle ESG backlash. Help us here. When people think about risk, where should executives and team, as it relates to ESG plus T, consider focusing their time?
Well, I think it's really up to every company. They have their own specific footprint, people, assets, geography, products, services. So everybody needs to look at it specifically for their business, specifically for their sector, and not try to copy others, but try to see what is the most important risk profile and opportunity profile that they can develop. And to me, the ESG discussion, pros and cons, there's an Economist cover story recently that really went at ESG in a big way. And whether you call it ESG or sustainability or something else, it's about those issues and those risks and those opportunities. And I always bring in the T, not because I want people to call it ESG and T, but because technology is pervasive in every sense of the word. And I just recently wrote a piece that talked about how the tech piece affects the value protection, creation, or destruction of ESG and other types of value within the organization.
We'll be sure to link that in the show notes because it was a great overview piece of you have to think about not only the economic transition that we're in, but how the role, like you said, of technology plays in us really thinking about all these key topics together, from cybersecurity, which is often top of mind for organizations, but you also get into some other elements of the T that I think could be very helpful for people as they identify the risk profile. I do think that there's an interesting piece because now you have 2 years of reflection. What would you point to or tell people to think about as they read the book, or how can they stay up to date? Because environment, social governance is changing. And I think we learned that the last 2 years. We see that as materiality assessment and stakeholder engagement frequency is up around the world, where they're looking at annual and quarterly reviews. How can people stay up to date? What can they do as they think about the references?
Sure. I mean, actually, since I wrote the book, I'm writing now an annual manual called the ESGT Megatrends Manual. It's really trying to capture the big picture things that are happening and then translate it down to tactics for businesses, for leaders of organizations. And I think one of the most important things that we should have learned from these last couple of years is the idea of having situational awareness, something that informs your business strategy, informs your risk management, and informs your product and service development. And so if you're purchasing software or you're bringing in data and you're creating software, are you thinking about the AI ethics implications or the diversity and inclusion implications, et cetera? So it's a very interconnected world, and it's really important to translate the very big picture stuff that's happening into your daily tactics and business decision making.
And I'm going to take a moment and do a quick brag on you as others read this trend document. And I hope you pin it as your annual read through reading, because each section has about 5 or so tips that are super practical and simple for leaders. And then at the end, you aggregate them all in 25 tips to consider. And so I really encourage those who are tackling this issue to mark, and we'll put it in the show notes, this piece. As we think about this idea of leaders being prepared, we have Sarah Chapman earlier in an episode talk about this is a team sport. We also had Rob Fisher from KPMG talk about the notion that we need to have trust. What can leaders do to build more trust, or what you call really empathy in your book, as they work to collaborate across the division on environment, social, and governance?
Yeah, so, the book has the ESG and T chapters, but it starts with the situational chapter talking about megatrends. And then secondly, the leadership, trust, the ethics, the culture. And I think that without the right kinds of leaders leading, everything else kind of becomes questionable. And I think boards, especially in the for-profit space, but also nonprofit, have an exceptionally important responsibility that they don't always assume, which is to make sure that the CEO and the executive or management team are made up of leaders that are not just good at what the business is about, but have that emotional intelligence, are not hubristic or not sociopathic, that they're actually thinking about their business as a collection of stakeholders, and that they understand how their business footprint impacts these external and internal stakeholders.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a piece too, where as the spotlight is on this topic, and for those executives dealing in the trenches, there is also that element of when you called out from the Harvard Business Review, sort of these 10 CEO competencies. I really encourage leaders to read through those, because there's a part where you have to be self-aware that, hey, I'm really stressed right now, or I'm really burnt out. And what can I do to mitigate that before I engage in this very interesting topic as it relates to environment, social, and governance? And I think over the last 2 to 3 years, I've really learned that and have tried to really think about, is this the moment that I want to tackle that topic? because I don't know if I'm ready to be engaged in a way that would be meaningful and productive. And that takes a lot to work through as an executive. And I know you coach executives and boards on this. Anything that what's a good question that maybe somebody could ask themselves to help them take a beat before they dive right into something with their team?
Well, I think remembering that we're all human beings and having a moment of mental health awareness, let's say, without delving into people's private situations, but just giving people a moment to be themselves. I've always found it's certainly helped me throughout my career in very difficult situations, maintaining a sense of humor, maintaining a sense of who the other people are, listening, giving people a little space, especially after the pandemic, while we're still in it to a certain extent. But there may be more pandemics. We're living through something called monkeypox suddenly. So there will be more. And I think that the other piece that I really, counsel people on is we're going to be living in a world of continuous risk and crisis. They may not be huge mega risks or huge mega crises, but we all have to be prepared. So I think we have to have the mental space and fortitude to deal with a world that's going to be challenging.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for putting out into the world such practical resources on how boards and executives and practitioners tackle these topics together. And we look forward to seeing more wonderful mega trends come from you and putting into practice the work that you have learned from your career over the last 3 decades. Thanks so much for being on ESG Talk, everyone. We'll talk real soon. Hope you tune in to our next couple episodes. And don't forget to rate or review us. Your feedback, we crave it in order to shape every next episode.